What happens at laser tag never stays at laser tag.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
I feel like you could be like in Ghostbusters or something.
Oh my God, you have got some stories.
Let's talk about laser tag.
Who knew you were a laser tag legend?
Time to get laser unfocused. Tag Talk with Tivia.
Welcome to Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Hi, I'm Tivia. Today we'll get some perspective on the tech side of Photon from someone who is there from the early days with stories to share from home base to Starbase to Beamsport. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Eric Kimminau, who was formerly the lead tech at Photon Dallas and also at the first Starbase. And we're not talking SpaceX Starbase here, although we are still talking Texas. And he was also the webmaster behind the Beamsport forum. And so a lot of background around Photon and laser tag in Texas. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here to kind of reflect on some memories from those early days of laser tag and Photon. And when and how did you first become involved with Photon Dallas?
So in July of 1984, I was transferred with a company that I was working for from Kansas City down to Dallas. And on the Northwest flight, on the way down to Dallas, I pulled the magazine out of the seat back on the airline, and there was a full-page ad for Photon. It probably took me 3 or 4 weeks after I'd moved to Dallas before I went in on a Saturday afternoon for the first time, and from the first game, I was hooked. I was playing every Saturday, usually 1 or 2 nights a week, started in leagues, and then started talking with the technician, Brian, in the Dallas store, and he really kind of convinced me that if I went for an associate's degree in electronics, I could get hired as a technician at Photon. And I had the opportunity to meet George Carter and Dan Allen several times and talk to George about becoming a tech. And finally, I went and started school. And then that put me on third shift at work. And I was going to school evenings. So it kind of killed my during the week play, but it had me there playing every Saturday and Sunday. And then as soon as I graduated, I took the test and then went through the week-long training class, and I became technician at Home Base. I was number 2 technician there for about 3 months. And then Brian got another job and I became the head technician. I ended up working at Photon in total for almost 5 years. In, I think it was 87, we opened Starbase. So I was part of the team that designed the radio and lighting and smoke layout for Starbase. And it was really kind of an intent to pre-prove out the layouts that were going to be used for Tokyo.
Now, for those who are not familiar, because I was joking to some extent, but we're not talking about what people currently know as Starbase with SpaceX. We're talking about a laser tag field. Explain to me, if you would, please, what Starbase was.
So the primary field in Dallas was called an alpha layout. And just for a point of reference, if you go onto the ex-Dallas players on Facebook and go into the photo albums, there's a album of field maps. And you can see what an alpha and what the Starbase field map looks like. But really, the alpha and omega fields were 2 full story playing fields. where a Starbase was really like the ground floor and then maybe half a story higher, 3.5, maybe 4 feet up to a second level. Um, the the design of Alpha and Omegas were for the players. They were mirror images, left and right, red and green side. But the observation deck was really just kind of down the middle, and you could look down on each side of the playing field and see people running around. And there were lots of times where people would get on the back halls or back behind partitions or behind the corners or in the airlocks, and you couldn't see them. Starbase's intent was to make this an OBDEC player's game, so that the players on the field could really be seen almost the entire time they were playing, so that the people on the OBDEC shooting the light beam phasers from observation deck had targets the entire game.
Phaser stations were a huge part of that.
Absolutely. And really the prove out of phaser stations in home base was all in preparation for Starbase. They expected Starbase phaser stations to be a huge money-making opportunity. The Starbase location was on the fourth floor of the Dallas West End Marketplace in Dallas, and there were like 5 bars in the building, and the rest of the building was all shops. It was like a shopping mall in a high-rise building. The original building was a 5-story cookie factory that they completely refurbished, and Starbase was on the 4th floor.
And this was affiliated with Photon or something separate?
Oh no, it was absolutely opened by Photon Corporate,
Okay.
out of the Northwest Highway offices in Mesquite.
Very good. So what did your role as a tech really consist of?
It's probably the funnest job I've ever had in my life. I literally got paid to play Photon. There really wasn't anyone else working in the store whose job it was to get paid and play Photon. And the primary job was fixing equipment if it ever broke down, but then I had to play in it to make sure it worked. So I would, on average, play 6 to 8 games every shift I was working.
That is not a bad gig at all.
No, it's not.
And what are some of the names we would recognize you as using as a player?
So as a player, I first played as the Wraith and Logan, never Logan 5, always just Logan. But then once I became a tech, I really didn't want to associate my tech play with my player play. So I would play as Pod Oh God for the most part. I had a couple of different iterations, but it was always a play on that. Just because, you know, besides repairing the equipment, I also did a lot of research and development activity for the Dallas corporate offices that were right next door. So we were constantly playing with the equipment, trying to make it more durable. Things like you have helmets there behind you, all the way around and up on the top and on the back corners. There are LEDs that are pushed through from the inside of the helmet. And, you know, a bump into the wall would invariably push the LED back into the helmet. So we took a Dremel tool and shaved all the LEDs flush, and then lightly painted super glue so that it had a very shiny, almost polished looking surface. And that almost eliminated the push throughs. If somebody hit really hard, especially like on the bridges, that had metal edges, or going through the doorway on an airlock, a really hard impact might pop the front ones out, but that was really the only LEDs that would ever push through anymore. And it had the other side effect of it actually, once we started shaving the infrared LEDs, it made you easier to hit, which a lot of players didn't like, but a lot of players did, especially new players. For the older crew, it was second nature to do a snapshot, even at somebody from the other side of the field. But for a beginner player, it was tough to figure out, how close do I have to get before the targeting LED would light up. And that led to a lot of work determining what the correct barrel length was to get you the highest level of accuracy without compromising your ability to easily hit another player. So we did a lot of work with that, especially as we were working on the light beam phasers to make sure that we had the correct focal length for receiving the signal from the infrared.
Now, I've heard different names. I've also heard them referred to as V4s. So could you kind of walk me through the variations of the phasers?
So I really didn't work on what is probably considered V1 and V2, which were the metal shelled phasers. My first phaser was the lighter molded phaser that actually had photon molded into the side of the plastic phaser, the kind of longer nose with kind of the bulbous end on it. And we had those really in all of the phasers until the light beam phaser came out. And that became a much square handled, blockier, and it was considerably heftier phaser to accommodate the lens optics to create the light beam effect that would come from the strobe bulbs that were installed. So that's really version 3 and 4.
And what was the timeline, do you recall, for when those rolled out and changed?
Light beams really came out really just before Starbase opened. We were doing a whole lot of work. So George always wanted the effect from the opening scene of the original Star Wars movies, where you could see the beam come out of the weapon and then follow behind it. And he really wanted the red laser bolt of the blasters from Star Wars. But there's a whole lot of laws about shooting lasers at people, especially anywhere near eyes. And there's lots of other things that you have to deal with lasers, and the amount of time it would take to fire a laser and leave it on and then turn it off so that you got that kind of tracing effect. The person you were shooting at was long gone. And we really figured that out during the filming of Eric Johnson's Zap video. We actually had 4 red laser phasers for the filming of that video at Home Base in Dallas. And even with the heavy amounts of fog that we had out on the field. You just couldn't get the kind of effect that George really wanted to try and get with a real laser beam. That then led towards, okay, how can we get a big fat beam? That was the goal of a light beam phaser, something big and fat that you could see, especially in the starbase setting, someone shooting all the way across the field. It was all designed to be a visual effect for the people that were shooting on the Obdeck phaser stations, so that it's like you could tell where people were shooting, and it helped you find other targets to shoot at.
Very cool. It sounds like you had a lot of fun figuring out some of these things, and I'd love to know what you felt was the most innovative part of the Photon system, be it the hardware or the software.
Before I do that,
Sure.
this
Oh my goodness.
is
Okay.
the white suit that I wore, signed by all three of the band members from Eric Johnson's band, because I was in the video.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so to Eric, with many thanks from Eric Johnson, thanks for the zaps from Reggie, and thanks for everything, Brett, who was the drummer.
Very cool. And
Probably
for those who are not familiar, could you just give some background to that?
Sure. So Eric Johnson is a guitar virtuoso. Um, Imagine someone who could play Jimi Hendrix or Led Zeppelin, or any of what you would consider to be some of the greatest rock and roll music of all time, but he could play 8 notes for every one of theirs. It was amazing how fast he could play, and he has some very amazing songs. I love Cliffs of Dover, but one of the songs that he wrote is called Zap, and there's a very cool music video for it, that was all shot at the Northwest Highway store. And the premiere video night for it was actually held at the Hard Rock Cafe in Dallas. And then after that opening night, it wasn't seen for a very long time, because there was contention over who owned it. There were marketing dollars that were kicked in by Pepsi to help market Photon that got spent to help with some of the production costs for the Zap video. And that then meant that Pepsi kind of felt they owned part of it. And almost 15 years to the day, I'd reached out through Eric's manager, that I got a hold of through, this is before there was Facebook or anything else, but I'd started running the Beamsport website. And through Eric's manager, I actually got a hold of Eric Johnson, and he slipped to me a copy of the video, and it ended up getting posted on Beamsport and then released to the world. So
The internet changed a lot, didn't it?
it has.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the background on that story, and kind of segue back to what I was asking as far as what you felt was the most innovative part of the Photon system. Any thoughts on that? The whole thing was innovative at the time, of course.
Yeah, I think of the active equipment, the real-time scoring was probably the biggest game changer for for Photon, and it existed before I started working there, but the ability to actually know what your score was at all times during the game, to have people on the ob deck that could yell out to teams, especially during league play, which team was in the lead or which team was behind, whether or not you could tell whether or not players had gotten the base or not. Um, that that really not only increased the level of competition, but it also brought a level of interaction with the audience that there really had never been anything like that for sports where the audience could be part of the sport.
Photon really was a spectator sport in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. And it was absolutely intended to be a spectator sport for Starbase. I
Mhm.
mean, the Starbase field was intended to increase the amount of interaction of the players, but it also increased the amount of interaction for the audience. Um, because they could pretty much see all of the players on the field all of the time, unless they were kind of behind the base tower or behind a couple of the partitions. Um, it really made it a audience spectator game, as well as increase the interaction between all the players on the field.
Well, it definitely sounds like there was a lot that was being worked through there. And you referenced that it was in preparation for Japan.
Correct.
So could you talk a little about that?
Um, uh, I wish I could say I knew more about Tokyo. I can point you to a couple of girls who worked in the Dallas store that ended up going and working in Tokyo. Um, but it was a multi-story building with multiple fields. And the intent was to make going to a Photon Arena a complete, like, immersive science fiction experience. Um, Bits and pieces that were used in a bunch of the other fields, the sliding Star Trek doors that they had in the Fountain Valley store were integral parts of the Tokyo location. So it was all trying to make it like you boarded a ship and then you were going to battle with aliens.
Well, Photon was always clearly intended to be a very immersive game, and so I see how there were so many elements that really played into that. What else about it do you think made Photon so special?
Um, the well, everything that made it immersive, the amazing sound systems, the lighting, the strobe effects, the timing of the soundtracks with the lighting effects on the field, the fog. It was all combined to make it, as we've said, an immersive experience, something that made you, if you were watching from the observation deck, it made you want to play. And once you got the equipment on and you experienced the adrenaline rush of running around in the dark and coming across people and having to make the split second decision, are they friend or foe? Um, it just hooked people.
Did you yourself ever play at other Photon locations?
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah. I mean, both of the Dallas stores, Tulsa, Oklahoma City. I played both Detroit stores, both Chicago stores. I played Ocean City, Maryland, played New Orleans, Baton Rouge, played Houston, played Fountain Valley. That's probably the extent of my travels to other Photon arenas.
What elements really made one stand out versus another? Any particular highlights that you can recall?
Um, Ocean City was very small in comparison to most of the other fields. Fountain Valley was massive. Um, it made the Northwest Highway, the original home base store, seem very small. Both of the Oklahoma stores were larger than Dallas. Starbase was considerably smaller than the Northwest Highway Alpha field. Um, it was very easy to run from one side of the field to the other, and to be honest, while Starbase was very much um, exciting to watch from the observation deck, it kind of got boring to play if you were a very consistent regular player because it was so much smaller than Northwest Highway. Um, the Alpha field had so many places to hide. It had so many interesting and unique angles. You know, there were places that you could stand in the airlock and be completely covered and get a shot at the base through one of the side holes on the base tower. Um, there were places from underneath the portholes, underneath the netting, where you had about a 6 or 7 inch wide slot that you could look up through the floor next to the railing through the side hole of the base tower, and you could just see the corner of the LEDs for the base. So being able to sneak up and get the base shot without anybody being able to see you. Um, Huge long back hallways, the huge ramps going up and down the back end of the field on both sides. The catacombs, there was nothing like that on a Starbase field. And when you got into the Omega class fields, the catacombs just got even bigger. So, it made it just that much more like you were on a Starbase. You weren't just going into, um, you know, a store in an office park. You were going somewhere. It was transporting you somewhere else.
And I definitely hear from many people that that's the experience and what really, kind of made that so unique and so different at the time. Having been around so many of these places, you must have some memories and some stories. So what are some of your favorite memories of the Photon experiences you had?
Um, Midnight lights out games. Uh, the Zap video shoot. Um, we had lots of, VIPs and dignitaries would come into Dallas. Um, I got to meet almost all of the famous WWE wrestlers at the time. They would come in, they came in many times in different groups um, to play in after hours parties where they would rent the entire facility for their group. Um, and
That
they
had to
were
have been a good time.
Oh yeah, and they were all really cool guys. Nothing really like the personas that they were showing on TV. They were
You mean
there,
that
and
wasn't real?
they were having a lot of fun. Um uh I got to meet all the folks from Fleetwood Mac,
Hmm.
um who in many ways helped compose the game tracks. Um, those are probably the best memories out of Dallas. Um, as the Northwest Highway store shut down, um, the focus and Gary Adornato took over Photon Corporate. Um, Really, the main corporate store became Fountain Valley.
Mm.
And I was flown out for 2 weeks, and the head tech of Fountain Valley was a guy named Joe. He and I were tasked with trying to make the game gear more playable. And there'd been a couple of really great advancements in battery life, where we could get all of the current we needed for about 3.5, almost 4 hours of continuous gameplay out of a single battery. So we tried to figure out how we could make the gear into something that really anyone could play. One of the biggest complaints from um, kids and really from women were wearing the battery belts. They were very heavy. Um, they tended to cause lots of bruises, I'm sure you experience. For kids, especially the littlest kids that wanted to play, some of them you couldn't get the belt tight enough. So we actually created a couple of 3 battery pack belts that we'd keep on the charger just for the littlest kids that wanted to come in and try to play. But really, we tried to come up with something where it would make it easier to play, and we came up with a backpack battery belt. Um, the first iteration was all leather. It was all riveted together. It was really designed more for an adult, but we had some adjustability with sliding straps on the back that would shorten or lengthen the 2 straps that went over your shoulders, and then the same pull to zip tight straps on the sides with 2 belt clips. And you could really undo 1 belt clip and lift the whole unit off and then hang it on the rack. That significantly decreased the weight. And then it really was down to the visibility of the helmet. And there was lots of discussion about trying to make the helmets more form fitting or smaller. And George absolutely fought that. He wanted it to be the experience of wearing a large helmet, having the decreased visibility, increased the tension while you were playing. So we really didn't ever try to change that. But there were lots of advancements towards the end of Northwest Highway and going into Fountain Valley, trying to improve the lifespan of the cables, especially the cables that connected from the chest pod up to the helmet. And we moved to the steel or aluminum coiled um, flexible cable that had loose wires running down the middle of it. Um, they were so much stronger than even the coiled cables that lifetime was. We were measuring a lifespan of a set of helmet cables before we went to that style in weeks of play. Sometimes a set of cables wouldn't even last a full week if you had heavy league play going on.
Oh, wow.
Just the constant removal and the weight hanging from the pod racks in the staging room just tore up, especially the boots on each end, up the helmet and on the side of the chest pods. Moving to the coiled cable with the loose sliding wires in it significantly extended the life of the cables, and it really came down to then just the boots that were at each end. And once those failed, it was a pretty easy, quick repair to cut the old one off, rubber cement a new one on, and you were back in business without having to repair any of the wires.
Were there other ways that you were adjusting things or improving things that might have come into play towards the end?
Um, for the most part, gameplay really didn't change. Um, we we played a little bit with um, some different scoring methodologies that they tried out only in the Northwest Highway store, and it just never really seemed to the change really didn't seem to pay off with what it was going to cost to try and roll it out to all the other game centers. I mean, the 1.2-second firing rate, the 5 different sounds that you hear, the standard scoring, whether you hit someone on the other team or on your own team, and 200 points for base really seemed to be like the sweet spot for gameplay. The real improvements came in making the phasers more accurate. Really, it more consistent reading the code of a player and properly scoring it and making sure that score got properly sent back to the game computer. There was always regular maintenance that needed to happen in the field that didn't happen in a lot of the franchise stores. Um, uh, I've only talked with a couple of the techs since I've worked at Photon, and on a monthly basis, we were recalibrating the radios to the game computers in both the Northwest Highway and the Starbase store. Uh, Talking with Joe in Fountain Valley, he said he'd been a tech there for 2.5, almost 3 years, and he didn't remember ever recalibrating the radio systems on either of their fields to the main game system, which surprised me because, I mean, just the age of the components would change the radios and how they were properly matched the antenna system. Dust on the antenna systems over the playing field would change how strong the signal was, um, going from the game system to send the results of a hit or receiving the scores from player pods. So I really don't think a lot of the franchise stores kept up with their, especially the main radio equipment and antennas, the way that we did in Dallas.
Well, in Dallas, you were always, I'm sure, on top of um, making adjustments because you were crafting it for others. And I've understood that sometimes you might get some feedback either directly or indirectly from players, and sometimes that would play into moves that you made. For example, the need for clearing. Can you kind of speak to how things evolved from the very beginning to to make those adjustments to make the game even better?
Well, they always had the requirement to clear from when I started playing. So that has to be been a Gen 1 or Gen 2 um, change in gameplay before I started. So clearing, for those who don't know, was you could only shoot someone 3 times before you had to shoot something else. Um, so trying to strategically put yourself where you could always see 2 or more targets was a huge advantage. And the base was always a fantastic place to, camp yourself close because you could 1, 2, 3 clear, 1, 2, 3 clear. Um, it was great finding game tracks that had the perfect synchronicity with the timing of your phaser shots. And when you'd see a really experienced player that was doing a swing fire, swing fire, swing fire, swing fire, in perfect time, exactly 1.2 seconds each direction. So you were firing as fast as you possibly could and trying to get the highest score you possibly could in a game.
Sounds almost artistic when you put it like that.
Oh, I mean, it, we saw some amazing things that people came up with playing the game in Dallas. Willie Lacanto, aka Shadow, is the inventor of the lean. And I know the lean made it to lots of other fields, but I've never seen a guy be able to run leaned with his back at a 45-degree angle, his helmet tilted back so you couldn't see any of the LEDs coming at you, his arm perfectly curved, and his other hand held so that it just blocked the LEDs in front. I mean, he was unhittable, and he would run at you in that way, and it was amazing. That was probably one of the things that resulted in some gameplay. No leans. You had the game commanders really watching for people that were trying to block, especially chest pod, um, holding your arm to block your helmet IR. Um, Lots of those rule changes started coming in to make it, I guess, fair, especially for the new people that were coming in. So you weren't just going in and newbie nuking.
Mm-hmm. I'm almost amazed as you tell that story that the helmet stayed on.
Oh, he cranked the chin strap down tight, and it was kicked back. I mean, even though the helmets were supposed to be worn flat, he would kick it up so that the bottom of the visor would be about here, and then kicking your head back that much further, it was impossible to hit.
Well, maybe the early stages of where some rules and guidelines came into play for other systems. Did you stay involved with any form of laser tag after Photon?
No, no,
No.
no. I went and started working in the computer industry, and then met my wife in 1989, and when we got married in 1991, about 6 months afterwards, she had been working for EDS, and EDS got bought by GM, and they moved her entire team up here to Detroit, and it's where her family's from. So we knew we always wanted to try and move to Detroit to be near her family. The opportunity arose where EDS paid to move us up here, and I've been here ever since.
And was there when you made that move, were you able to enjoy the Detroit Photon at that time, or was that
It was
long gone at
closed.
that point?
Yeah, it was
Uh,
closed. It's interesting. Until probably 8 or 9 years ago, the northernmost Detroit store is about 5 minutes from where I live, and it was a larger facility that had not only a Photon Game Center but a couple of bars in it, and it turned into a big like multi-theater movie theater,
oh,
and the building was there until about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and they tore it down and built a big office building.
well, at least the memories exist, and it sounds like you have a lot of really great ones. Any final memories or stories before we get into some rapid fire tag talk?
Um, so I don't know if you know this, if anybody has ever said it or not, but being in home base, and being the lead tech for home base, every store actually ran nightly pod reports. And
Okay.
the and those every like Photon Game Center, the franchise ones anyway, had a modem hooked up to the game computer, and it would actually dial out to home base and send a copy of the pod reports. So I actually have pod reports from a couple of stores.
Oh, wow.
Right now, the only ones I have left were New Orleans, Northwest Highway, the Starbase, which was listed as a beta field, and then Houston. And it was interesting because every pod was numbered. It had a code, and it would report its ID that it used to communicate with the home radio. It would report the average number of hits that it sent, the average number of hits it received, any bad codes, the total number of valid codes sent or received every game on average, um, any unknown codes, and all hits sent and hits acknowledged for each day of play. And from those, we could tell how well the game equipment and the central game computer and radio system were being maintained. If you started seeing, lots of errors, lots of unknown codes or unacknowledged hits coming in on a daily basis, you could tell that they needed to do some maintenance work on the main system. And I didn't realize that there was actually someone in the corporate offices that took a copy of those reports every day. And I don't know if you can see this, that received stamp up in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
They would actually receive, stamp, and file the reports for every store every day. So if they started getting complaints from anybody, they could go and pull the reports for the field and see if they could identify game issues that needed to be addressed.
That's
I,
interesting.
I actually have the strategic systems tech manual that has all of the blueprints and all the instructions, all of the troubleshooting codes, the layouts of the systems and where the lighting modules are and all of that stuff. So those are my two big pieces of memorabilia from Photon, or the Zap outfit, and my strategic manual. And then I have two signs from the Northwest Highway store. I have the staging area sign from the Northwest Highway store, and I have the control room do not enter sign from the tech room door.
Well, that's awesome. And you're jumping ahead to one of my questions, because I always like to find out, what is the coolest souvenir that somebody has, and you've got some really cool ones, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, now Eric, you were Pod Oh God. That is a name I recognize from the Beamsport site. Can you tell me a little bit about about that and what you did?
Sure. One of the guys who was an assistant tech in Dallas and then became the head tech in Houston. Um, he went by the player named Romer, Brad, started a website, and really used a content management system that had forums. So people could start sending messages back and forth and just sharing memories of playing Photon. And he was moving around, and I already had a server that I was hosting with an ISP. I could very easily host another website on it. So I offered to take over hosting of a website. And as part of that, I registered a new domain, Beamsport. And really, it started out as just a way for all of the ex-Dallas players to stay in touch and share news, what was going on, who had kids, all of that kind of stuff. but it very quickly word started to spread. It was a website anybody with a web browser could get to. So I started trying to find people from the other game stores. And each time I would find somebody from a new game store, I'd create a new Photon Planet for their store and create the same kind of two or three base forums for people from that store to be able to communicate. And then the big thing that started to attract a lot of people was images from the stores. And it really started with people just, scanning and uploading the personal pictures that they had from when they were players, and then people started scanning their badges, and who had the most badges kind of became the badge of honor. Um, but through that, out of the blue, George Carter signed up for Beamsport, and it was kind of weird. It was like 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning. I was sitting down playing a game, and I got a notification that a new user had registered with the handle the creator. And I was like, okay, who's this? And it said George Carter, and he actually registered with his real address, his real phone number, and his real email address. So I called him at 1:30 in the morning. I figured if he was awake enough to be able to sign up for Beamsport, I could give him a call. So I called and I talked to him for over an hour. And he's like, how can I help? And I said, there used to be like a bookshelf of corporate photo albums. Do you still have any of them? And he said, I've got all of them. And I said, well, would I be able to borrow a couple of them so I can scan the pictures and send them back to you? And he said, how many do you want? And he literally sent me a huge box with 15 of the corporate photo albums. And I actually paid a young kid to sit and scan pictures. And it took him 5 weeks to scan all the pictures. And I uploaded them all onto Beamsport, broken down by each of the stores the albums were for. So um, that drew a lot of people in, and it actually drew in a couple of really cool people. It brought in a couple of the actors from the Photon TV series.
Really?
And yeah, and I actually got a copy of the original Photon series, like media Bible, the
Wow.
original pencil drawings of what each of the characters looked like and what their normal costume or uniform would look like. And all of those got scanned and put up on Beamsport, and then it just became difficult to keep Beamsport maintained without people hacking into the software. And I was dependent upon the the people that wrote the content management system for keeping it secure. And rather than doing that, I had a system crash where I lost pretty much all of the forum messages, but
Wow.
I was able to retain all of the images. So it really came down to, okay, I'm done doing the website. Let's get all the images up. And there's ex Dallas Photon Players Facebook group, and there are thousands of photos broken up into albums by each of the stores. But there's even some pictures from Tokyo. Um, it's got the Bible. It's got all of the phaser and pod sounds. It's got all of the game tracks. It's got the Zap video. So if anybody is ever stumbling around on Facebook, look for the Dallas Photon Players Facebook group. I'm still the admin and love to have people come and share in the memories.
That is awesome. And I certainly remember the Beamsport site, and you probably saw my name as Tivia, my laser tag name. But, prior to our discussion here, we had a conversation, and you were telling me that there was a player who actually used the name Tivia in Dallas. So I'm just wondering,
Yeah, and she
I
actually
was only,
worked in Starbase.
and we're not, are you talking about Jet Clark, who is kind of
No,
credited as being the
I I
inspiration for Tivia? You had
I
somebody else in
oh
mind
I
here.
know Jet. She worked at Northwest Highway. She worked in Starbase. She was John Hunstable's girlfriend, best friend, longtime soulmate. Jet is I love Jet. She's a Janet is a wonderful person, but no.
But you're talking about somebody else who used the player name. So I'm kind of intrigued by how many real life elements ended up in the TV show. And I was unaware of an actual Tivia code name being used. So do you remember anything more about the players who might have lent some inspiration to the series that then went on to promote it?
Well, of course, Lord Bathan exists.
Of course.
Um, Parsival, um,
Was he based off of Steve Holt?
yes, absolutely, Steve Holt, or Steve, Schteeveeve, as many E's as he could fit in the character name slot. Um, there were a couple of others. I I can't remember all of the series character names, but I believe there was a Modnar and there was
Amandar?
man.
Or was Modnar the real life code name?
Well,
I didn't think Mandar was based on one.
the real life code name is Random, which in
Okay.
reverse is Modnar, which I think became
Interesting.
Mandar. Um, and Random would play as Random, and when he was just going out to mess around, he'd play as Modnar. Um, there were several others. Um, God, I wish I had a list of all of the character names from the series.
Well, there
Uh,
was the lizard named Leon, which I'm told was based around somebody who used the name Recon. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. So Brian Martin, aka Recon. Yeah, so Recon very much a real person. There was a whole group of guys that played paintball. And I think that is how they first met Recon. And then he got invited by the Photon players to come in and play. And next thing you knew, he was working there. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
Now, I am curious about the player who went by Tivia and what you remember of her.
I believe that Tivia is Jet. It's not the other Tivia that I remember from Starbase.
Oh, no, no.
Um,
Jet has been credited as being the inspiration for the Tivia character, but
correct.
what do you remember of? Clearly, they must have pulled the name from the real life player, even if the inspiration was from somebody else.
And Janet, was around far longer than the other person who really came in just before Northwest Highway closed and then moved to being an employee at Starbase. So, you know, nowhere near as much history as Jet had planned. I am sure she is the foundation for where the name originated.
Oh, and I am not questioning the inspiration
Yeah.
from Jet. I'm just kind of intrigued to find out that somebody else was using that name, and then the name popped up being used.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the other character names?
Oh, well, Bodie Lee, I don't know if the name
There
was
actually was a Bodie Lee that
okay,
played in Dallas.
really.
Yep. Um, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. I think he was a paramedic.
Okay. And then there was the Pike character. I don't know anything about that one.
No, I don't remember anyone playing as Pike.
Okay. So let's see. Hmm. I
I,
think
it
it's
it
the
really
main
makes
crew
me
there.
want to it really makes me want to go to Facebook and pull up the Bible.
Well, I would definitely be intrigued to see if you find some memories of where those ideas originated, because obviously they were trying to pull some real life elements to be relatable, as relatable as you can be when you're talking about a space lizard.
Yeah.
But no, it's kind of cool to hear that there was another player using that name, and what you do remember of that inspiration. So, um, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. There's a album with 6 pictures in it called Picture Book that was the primary like character color sheet for each of the players. And there's um I think it's Mandar, uh Bathan, I can't remember the guy who had the 4 arms, what his name was.
Well, that was Warrior, but for the bad guy side, they just kind of ended everything with R.
Yeah.
Destructor, Pyrar, Warrior, and
And
Mandar. That's why I didn't think that there actually was a Mandar. Plus, George said at the first Photon, he said we didn't have a Mandar. But, memory and whatnot, maybe something still inspired.
well, we didn't have a Mandar. We had Random and Modnar.
Close enough.
Yeah. So
And
there is a um album called the Photon TV Bible. And it actually has a short blurb of each character, what they were going to look like, and their name. So, Photon TV Bible, great pictures and background detail on each of the characters. Um, the person who played Mandar in the TV series,
David Stay.
phenomenal human being. He
Yes,
is,
we miss
he,
him a lot.
we do. David is the source of the picture book and the Photon TV Bible.
Oh my goodness. That's tremendous.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever mentioned that.
Um, yeah, so it was shortly after Beamsport was created, and word went out through the grapevine to all of the folks who played in Fountain Valley. And apparently David actually played in Fountain Valley.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, he
I, I
was in
don't I don't
California.
think I don't think he played a lot, but I think he played, and he knew some of the people that were regulars in Fountain Valley. And there was a group on another forum that was all people that knew each other from Fountain Valley, and through that they got word of the Beamsport website. And probably a year after Beamsport had been up and running, David applied, and um, probably 2 or 3 weeks after he applied, he actually uploaded the pencil drawing of Mandar and then the real picture of Mandar next to it. And he started telling us about a bunch of the pictures that he had from filming sessions. And he uploaded some of those. And gosh, there was another album.
Well, and I'll use this opportunity to say that he was kind enough to share a lot of those behind the scenes photos with me as well. And he similarly sent me just stacks of photos to scan and then return to him. And those ended up on the site that used to be called photonforever.com.
Yep.
And I have only just recently had to make a change to that site.
If in the albums area, you look around, there's an album called Videos. And it has the Zap video, it has the training video, and it also has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the TV series episodes, and it's got 5 of the commercials.
That's terrific. So glad that somebody has documented that.
Yeah.
Well, I am delighted to hear all your stories and get that perspective from the techie side.
Yeah.
I like to end my podcast with a little bit of rapid fire tag talk, some quick questions at you and some quick answers back. You game?
You bet.
Okay. First question, favorite Photon arena you ever played?
I really liked the Omega Field in Fountain Valley. It was just so massive.
Cool. Who was your favorite Photon character from the TV show?
Lord Bathan. Just because I know the real guy.
And he's a cool guy. I enjoyed
He
spending
is.
some time with him. I'm going to ask you anyway, of all that you've got, favorite Photon souvenir?
Oh, the Zap suit.
Favorite Photon arena element?
I love the game tracks. Game track 9.
All right. And favorite Photon tagline that still lives on 40 years later?
May the light shine.
There you go. Well, I thank you so much for taking some time and kind of reflecting on some of those memories. Yes, the light still shines, and that is my guest, Eric Kimminau. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining me for some Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for keeping the light alive. There are a whole lot of us that still wish Photon was around, that we could still play again today. I hope another opportunity for a Photon comes up. I would love to be able to play again.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for checking out this episode of Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Listen for more episodes on the first and third Friday of each month. Want to be a guest on an upcoming episode? Find out more and follow my blog and website at TiviaChickLovesLaserTag.com.